Hi, my name is Marley Winslow. I'm 32 years old, and this is the story of how a single night at my brother's birthday party shattered what was left of the fragile illusion I once called family, and how I made sure they would never forget it. I was born and raised in Stamford, Connecticut, a quiet place with tidy neighborhoods, big backyards, and the kind of families that smile politely in public while tearing each other apart behind closed doors. My family, the Winslows, always gave off the impression of unity. Sunday dinners, Christmas cards, shared vacations in Cape Cod. But truthfully, it was all a performance. A very expensive, emotionally bankrupt performance. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if this story is hitting close to home, take a second to like and subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next. I was the youngest of three. My brother Derek, older by 4 years, was always the golden child. Charming, athletic, confident. Then came my sister, Yayla, the peacemaker, though her peace usually meant keeping secrets and avoiding conflict until it rotted. And then me, Marley, the quiet one, the one who made straight A's, who paid for college with scholarships, who bought her own car at 24 and never asked for a penny from anyone. It's funny how being independent becomes a threat in families like mine, because independence means they can't control you. And in the Winslow household, control was everything. My parents weren't cruel, not in the way people imagine when they hear a story like mine. They weren't the type to yell or beat or scream. No, they were polite manipulators, guilt weavers. They could lace their voices with just enough disappointment to make your stomach turn. I used to lie awake as a teenager, going over every word I'd said during dinner, wondering if I'd offended someone by having an opinion. I moved out at 19 into a tiny dorm room, then bounced between studio apartments until finally, at 28, I bought my first condo. It was a miracle deal. A friend from college tipped me off about a foreclosure sale in a gentrifying neighborhood of Stamford. I used every penny I had saved, cashed out an old investment account, and closed the deal. The place was rough at first, but I worked overtime and renovated it myself. 2 years later, it was worth over $600,000. My name was the only one on the deed. It was mine. And then, things started to shift. At first, it was subtle. My parents dropping hints during family dinners. A condo is such a big responsibility for one person. My brother making jokes about how we could all be rich if Marley shared her secret real estate sauce. My sister suggesting I rent it out and move back into the family home for closeness. I brushed it off. I thought they were just being themselves, nosy, entitled, a little tone-deaf, but I was wrong. They were preparing me. The night of Derek's 36th birthday was supposed to be a celebration. He rented out a private room at one of the trendiest restaurants in downtown Stamford. My parents were there, smiling like royalty. Yayla showed up with her fiancé, and everyone seemed in good spirits. I even wore the dress my mom gave me last Christmas, the one she said finally made me look like I cared about appearances. I was trying, okay? I was trying to belong. I wish I had left the moment I walked in. The evening started as expected. Laughs, speeches, drinks. Then, right after the dessert was served, Derek tapped his glass and said he had a family announcement. I thought maybe he'd gotten a promotion or that Yayla was pregnant again. But instead, he said, "We've found the perfect investment property. It's already in the family, Marley's condo." I froze. People clapped. My parents beamed. Derek went on to say that the family had come together and decided to open a small business, a wellness retreat center, and that the condo would be the headquarters. He spoke like I had already agreed, as if this had been discussed and settled, but it hadn't. No one had even mentioned it to me. I stood up. My heart was pounding in my ears. "I'm sorry, what?" My father gave me that look, the one that used to make me shrink into my chair as a child. "Marley, this is a beautiful opportunity. We know you're not using the space to its full potential. It's time to think bigger, to think family." I said no, quietly, but firmly. "No, that condo is mine. I'm not signing it over." Yayla tried to speak, but Derek interrupted her and started raising his voice, saying I was selfish, that I never shared anything, that I always thought I was better than everyone else because I had a bougie little place and a boring job. Then it happened. He lunged toward me. At first, I thought it was a joke, a prank, part of the party, but his hand grabbed my wrist with such force it made me stumble. My mother stood up and slapped the table, yelling that I was humiliating the family. My father came around the table and pushed me toward the wall. I didn't fall, but I staggered. It all happened so fast. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. Not in fear, not even in sadness, just silence. A pure, still kind of clarity. I looked into the eyes of the people who raised me and saw nothing but greed and entitlement staring back. So I walked out. I didn't say a word. I left my coat behind. Left the gift I had brought for Derek, too. I walked down the street, heels clicking against the pavement, and I didn't stop until I reached my car. I sat behind the wheel for nearly 20 minutes, just breathing. That was the last family event I ever attended. The next morning, I contacted a real estate agent, but not to sell my condo. No. I asked how much I could get for the house my parents lived in, the one I knew was fully paid off, the one my grandparents left behind with only one heir named on the deed. My name. A fact they never expected I'd remember. Turns out, when I was 19, my grandfather had rewritten his will after my parents tried to move him into a retirement facility against his will. He left that house to me in full. No conditions, no co-owners. I had never touched it, out of guilt or loyalty or fear, but not anymore. I told the agent to list it, immediately. And that was only the beginning. After the listing went live, I felt like I had just dropped a lit match into a room soaked in gasoline. The fallout didn't take long to begin. It started with a call from my mother. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice was strained, laced with artificial calm, the way it always got when she was trying to manipulate without raising suspicion. Marley, sweetheart, I think there's been some kind of mistake. The listing says the house is up for sale? That must be an error. Call me back, okay? I didn't call back. I didn't need to. The house wasn't a mistake. The will wasn't a mistake. What had been a mistake for far too long was me pretending that their version of love was enough, that being in their orbit and shrinking myself into what they needed was worth the silence, the exhaustion, the quiet rage that lived in my chest. I had tiptoed around their egos for years, letting them undermine me, diminish me, twist my choices into selfishness. But that night at the restaurant, it had peeled something raw open. I wasn't going to be their quiet little afterthought anymore. The calls started coming in waves. First my father, who went straight to fury. You're selling your family's home? Do you know what you're doing? Then Yayla, who always played the mediator. Can we please just talk? We're family, Marley. There has to be another way. And Derek, he didn't call. He sent a text. 3 words. You're dead to me. That one made me laugh, not because it was funny, but because it confirmed what I had suspected for years. To him, I was never a person. I was a resource. As the days passed, I began to remember all the subtle digs, the ways they used me without ever saying thank you. When I helped Yayla with a down payment for her car, they called me generous. When I bought my condo alone, I was reckless. When I helped our dad file for bankruptcy, I was finally being useful. But the moment I refused to hand over something I had earned with my own sweat, I became the villain. They weren't interested in unity or support. They wanted control. They always had. The real estate agent, a woman named Shonda with sharp instincts and a voice that made you feel like you were in good hands, kept me updated every step of the way. She asked if I was sure I wanted to go through with it, knowing how complicated family sales could get. I told her yes, every single time. Not just because I wanted to make a point, but because it was mine. That house had been passed down to me, not them, and they had spent years acting like it belonged to all of us, holding birthday parties there, storing their furniture, painting the walls without asking, claiming rooms for the grandkids. They never once asked for permission. They assumed. They felt entitled. And that entitlement was about to meet reality. The day of the first open house was a Saturday. I didn't plan on going, but something pulled me there. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the desire to see the house one more time through my own eyes, not through the lens of obligation or guilt. When I arrived, Shonda was already inside, greeting a young couple with a baby in a stroller. The place looked bright, clean, full of potential. I walked through the rooms slowly, memories pressing in from all directions. The holidays, the quiet fights behind closed doors, the sound of my mother's heels clicking down the hall when she was angry. And then I walked into the backyard, where I saw Yayla standing by the fence, her face pale and stiff. "You can't do this," she said softly, not looking at me. "I already did. They have nowhere else to go." I laughed under my breath. "That's not true, and you know it. They have retirement savings, 2 other properties, and Derek's guest house. They'll be fine. They just won't be comfortable." She finally looked at me, eyes glassy. "This isn't you, Marley." I stepped closer. "You don't know me. You know the version of me who stays quiet to keep the peace. That version died the night Derek put his hands on me, and none of you did a damn thing." She started to say something, but I walked away. There was nothing else to say. She hadn't called after that night, hadn't checked in, hadn't apologized, and I wasn't about to let someone who had watched me be assaulted at a dinner table tell me who I was. The offer came in 2 days later, full asking price, no contingencies. The buyers wanted a fast close. I said yes. Shonda sent the paperwork. I signed with steady hands. That same afternoon, I got an email from a lawyer, my family's lawyer to be exact. Apparently, my parents were contesting the sale, claiming mental incompetence in the drafting of the will. It was a long shot, a desperate move. I forwarded it to my own attorney and told her to fight it. What they didn't know, what I hadn't told anyone, was that I had the original notarized documents, audio recordings of my grandfather explaining his decision, and a letter he wrote to me a year before his death, saying plainly, "They don't deserve this house, Marley. You do." When the lawyer representing my family realized how airtight my case was, they backed off, quietly. No apology, no admission of wrongdoing, just silence. The same kind they used to punish me as a child, as if I should feel guilty for defending myself. But I didn't feel guilty. I felt alive. And then came the party invitation. Yes, another party. Not a celebration this time. More of a desperate olive branch. My mother's 60th birthday. Hosted, of course, at a rented venue since their house was now legally under contract. The invitation was impersonal. A cold email with a time and address. No subject line. No, "Hope you're well." Just facts. I stared at it for a long time. Part of me wanted to delete it, pretend I never saw it. But another part, the one that had sat silently at all those dinners, that had handed over help without thanks, that had been bruised emotionally and physically, wanted to go, not to make peace, but to watch them squirm. So I replied with a simple, "I'll be there," and I was. I wore red, head to toe. Not the quiet colors they were used to, not navy or beige or soft pink. I walked in exactly 5 minutes late and watched their heads turn. My father was the first to approach, his smile strained. He leaned in to kiss my cheek, but I stepped back and offered a handshake. His eyes flickered with something, maybe embarrassment, maybe fear. My mother looked exhausted. Her makeup couldn't hide the lines that seemed deeper than I remembered. Yayla hovered by the buffet table, not meeting my eyes. And Derek? He wasn't there. Rumor had it he'd moved in with a friend out of town, trying to salvage what was left of his reputation after some failed investments. I hadn't heard from him since the text. I walked around the room slowly, collecting glances, nodding politely, making sure they saw me, unshaken, successful, unapologetic. And for the first time, I realized something that should have been obvious long ago. I didn't want their approval. I wanted freedom, and I had finally taken it. The weeks that followed my mother's birthday party were eerily quiet. No emails, no calls, no uninvited appearances. I almost convinced myself that the storm had passed, that the message had finally been received. But in my gut, I knew better. My family didn't lose quietly. They calculated. They waited. They circled like wolves just beyond the tree line, biding their time until your guard dropped and you turned your back. I didn't let mine drop. The sale of the house finalized on a chilly Thursday morning in late November. Shonda called me at 10:03 a.m., voice bright with satisfaction. "It's done. They wired the money. You're now officially $660,000 richer, and 2 properties freer." I thanked her, trying to keep my voice steady, but something in me was already shifting. It wasn't just relief, it was closure, weighted and real. I walked into my condo, set my keys on the marble counter I had installed with my own hands, and for the first time in years, let my body fall back against the couch. My chest heaved, and tears came, not from sadness, but release. The kind of tears that came when you've held your breath for so long, you forgot what air felt like. But peace, as I'd come to learn, was never permanent when it came to the Winslows. The turning point came on an ordinary Tuesday. I remember it not because anything seemed off that morning, but because of how perfectly normal everything had felt. I was walking back from my favorite cafe, oat milk latte in hand, when I saw the black SUV parked outside my building. At first, I thought nothing of it. Stamford was full of corporate types and delivery vehicles, but as I approached the entrance, the driver stepped out. It was Derek. He had always been the kind of man who made entrances feel like performances. Every step calculated, every word rehearsed to manipulate whoever stood before him. But this time, he didn't look confident. He looked tired, angry, desperate. "You've made your point," he said, skipping any kind of greeting. I stared at him, silent, waiting. He continued, voice low but sharp. "You humiliated this family. You sold the house. You think that makes you powerful?" I shifted my weight to one side and raised my brow. "I don't think it makes me powerful. I think it makes me free." He scoffed, eyes narrowing. "You always had a talent for playing victim." The words didn't hit like they once would have. They slid off me, powerless now. "You put your hands on me, Derek, in public, at your own party, and everyone just watched." He didn't flinch. "You embarrassed us. You were being difficult." I stepped closer. "You think because you've been the center of attention your whole life, people owe you something. I don't. Not my condo, not my silence, not my forgiveness." He looked like he wanted to argue, but the words didn't come. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "Then maybe this will speak your language." I hesitated before taking it. It was thick, too thick for a letter. I opened it slowly, half expecting some last-ditch legal threat. But what I found inside made my stomach twist. Photos. Dozens of them. Me at the bank. Me walking into my condo. Me at the cafe. Me standing in my window at night. "You had someone follow me?" Derek's voice was calm now, disturbingly so. "You took everything from us. The house, the respect, our image. You think you're untouchable? Everyone has weaknesses, Marley. You shouldn't be alone in that place. Bad things can happen." The threat was barely veiled, but I didn't let him see my fear. Not this time. "Are you threatening me?" I asked, my voice low, controlled. He smirked. "I'm reminding you that we're still family, and families don't betray each other." "Funny," I said, tucking the photos back into the envelope and sliding it into my purse, "because betrayal is exactly what brought us here." I turned and walked into the building, never looking back. My hands were shaking by the time I reached the elevator. I pressed the button 3 times, trying to calm my breathing, trying to remind myself that fear was how they controlled me. I wasn't that girl anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the walls, every distant sound outside made my muscles tense. I checked the locks. I left lights on. I kept my phone within reach. By morning, I was exhausted, but resolute. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about safety. This was about taking back the narrative. They wanted to make me feel small again, scared, unsure of myself. I wouldn't let them. I went straight to the police station and filed a report. I showed them the photos, explained the encounter. The officer who helped me was patient, but cautious. "Without direct evidence of a threat, it'll be hard to push charges," he said, "but we'll keep it on file. And if anything happens, you come to us immediately." I left feeling disappointed, but not defeated. I had learned long ago that justice didn't always come in legal forms. Sometimes it came from knowledge, from leverage, from control. So I started digging. It began with public records, Derek's business ventures, liens, lawsuits. Then came his social media, filtered posts about success and wealth, none of which matched the financial strain I knew he was under. I hired a private investigator, someone discreet and thorough. Within 2 weeks, I had everything I needed. Derek's company was crumbling. He had borrowed against assets he didn't own. inflated numbers to investors, even forged documents. If exposed, he could lose everything: his reputation, his money, possibly even his freedom. And just like that, the power shifted. I didn't go to the police. Not yet. I didn't leak the information. Not yet. I did something better. I sent him a single message. I know everything. Stay away from me, or the truth comes out. No signature, no threats, just certainty. He never replied, but I knew he saw it. The SUV never appeared again. The calls from my parents stopped. Yayla sent one final email asking if we could talk, if maybe we'd gone too far. I didn't answer. The silence was enough, and in that silence, I finally began to feel something I hadn't in years. Peace. Real peace. The kind that comes when you no longer live under someone else's shadow, when you stop asking permission to protect yourself, when you understand that love without respect isn't love at all. The point of no return had come and gone, and I hadn't just survived it. I had rewritten the rules. It's strange how quickly peace can start to feel like a foreign language when you've lived in chaos for so long. After weeks of silence from my family and the looming shadow of Derek finally retreating, I expected to feel triumphant, maybe even proud. But what I felt instead was a strange emptiness, like walking out of a burning building and realizing that you never learned how to live in the cold air. I had fought so hard to claim my independence, to defend what was mine, to force the people who once called themselves my family to look in the mirror. And now that I had it, complete and unquestionable freedom, I wasn't sure what came next. I started small. I rearranged my furniture, bought new curtains, replaced old photos on the wall with pieces of art that made me feel things. I wanted the space to reflect who I had become, not who I was when I first moved in. I signed up for pottery classes. I took long walks without headphones, just me and the sound of the wind brushing through the trees on the quieter streets of Stamford. I journaled more. I started talking to myself in the mirror in the mornings, not affirmations like you see in wellness videos, but simple questions. Are you safe? Are you calm? What do you want today? At first, I didn't have answers, but over time, I did. One of the biggest shifts came when I stopped asking why they did what they did. For years, that question had haunted me. Why did they treat me like I didn't belong? Why was my success seen as betrayal? Why couldn't they just love me without conditions? But the truth is, some people love power more than people, and if your growth threatens their control, they will always try to clip your wings. Understanding that didn't make the pain disappear, but it made it easier to release it. Their behavior wasn't my fault. It never had been. One afternoon, I found myself revisiting an old storage box tucked deep in my closet. Inside were letters from college, old birthday cards, childhood photos, even a few journals I had long forgotten. One entry from when I was 16 stood out. I had written, "I feel like a guest in my own family, like I'm only invited because they have to let me in the house." Reading those words as an adult broke something open in me. I had known, even back then. My instincts had always told me the truth. I just didn't trust myself enough to believe it. So I started trusting myself more. Professionally, I asked for a promotion. I had spent years playing it safe at work, always doing more than expected but never advocating for myself. I set a meeting with my manager, laid out my achievements, my goals, and told him what I wanted. To my surprise, he didn't hesitate. Within a month, I was promoted to senior strategist, and with it came a substantial raise, more autonomy, and the realization that my value didn't need to be validated by anyone else. Not a boss, not a parent, not a brother who never saw me. Socially, I began reconnecting with people I had unintentionally distanced myself from during the chaos. Friends I had turned down for dinner because I was too drained from family drama. Coworkers who had invited me to events I skipped out of fear I'd bump into someone I knew. Slowly, I started saying yes. And the more I said yes to them, the more I said yes to myself. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. I was laughing again, loudly and without apology. I was making eye contact. I was letting my guard down, not for everyone, but for those who had earned it. Then came the letter. It arrived on a quiet Saturday morning, no return address, handwritten in elegant cursive that I recognized instantly. My mother. I stood in the kitchen for a full 20 minutes, staring at the envelope. Part of me wanted to tear it up. Another part wanted to frame it. Proof that she still thought of me. In the end, I opened it. The letter was 3 pages long. It wasn't an apology. Not really. It was a weaving of explanations, half excuses, and attempts at understanding. She wrote about her upbringing, how her father had instilled the belief that family meant unity at all costs. She wrote about fear, about losing control of the family she had worked so hard to hold together. She said she didn't know how to respond the night of Derek's party, and that silence had always been her shield. There was no acknowledgement of the harm, no real ownership, but there was a line at the end that caught me off guard. I hope someday you'll let us try again. Not because we deserve it, but because you do. I didn't cry. I didn't feel rage. I just folded the letter and tucked it into a drawer. Not to forget it, but to remember where I stood. Growth didn't mean opening every door that knocked. Sometimes it meant keeping them closed and choosing peace over chaos. Healing, I realized, wasn't a straight line. Some days, I felt fierce and invincible. Other days, I felt fragile and unsure. But even on the worst days, I didn't feel lost. I was building a home inside myself, one decision at a time, and every time I chose myself, it grew stronger. I also started therapy, not because I was broken, but because I wanted to understand the blueprint my family had handed me. I wanted to rewrite the scripts I had inherited, that love means sacrifice, that silence is strength, that boundaries are betrayal. My therapist, a soft-spoken woman named Nadine, listened without judgment. She reminded me that I was allowed to grieve the family I wished I'd had, even as I let go of the one I did. In our sessions, I began to see patterns I hadn't noticed before. The way I minimized my own needs, the way I hesitated to celebrate myself in front of others, afraid of being seen as arrogant, the way I felt responsible for everyone's happiness but my own. It was like peeling away layers of someone else's skin to find the truth underneath. It hurt, it healed, and it made me whole. I started writing again, short stories at first, then personal essays. I didn't plan to publish them, but the act of putting words on a page felt like reclaiming space. One essay was about the condo, about how every wall held memories of becoming. Another was about the house I sold, titled Inheritance is Not Ownership. They were raw, vulnerable, imperfect, and they were mine. One night, after a particularly long writing session, I sat on my balcony overlooking the city lights and felt a wave of stillness wash over me. Not joy, not sorrow, just presence. I was no longer chasing validation. I wasn't waiting for apologies. I wasn't trying to fix what had been broken by people who didn't think it needed fixing. I was simply here, and that was enough. I didn't forgive my family. At least, not yet. Maybe not ever. But I did forgive myself for staying too long, for hoping too hard, for trying to earn what should have been freely given. And in that forgiveness, I found something even more powerful than revenge. I found peace. It was early spring when I received the second letter. This time, it wasn't from my mother. There was no familiar handwriting, no personal touches, no careful phrasing meant to disarm. This letter came from a law office in downtown Hartford, typed and formal, with a firm tone that immediately made my skin prickle. The Winslows had filed a civil lawsuit against me. The claim? Intentional infliction of emotional distress and wrongful profit from family assets. It sounded absurd. It was absurd, but it was real. My hands trembled slightly as I read through the carefully worded accusations. According to them, I had weaponized my grandfather's will against the family and caused emotional trauma and public embarrassment, particularly for Derek, who had reportedly suffered reputational damages after losing access to the family estate. It would have been laughable if it hadn't felt so calculated. I could see their fingerprints all over the timing. They had waited until I had rebuilt my life, until I was stable, whole, content, and then struck, hoping to shake me again. But they didn't know the woman they were dealing with anymore. I called Nadine that night. We talked for nearly an hour, and her voice was the anchor I needed. "This isn't about justice," she said gently. "This is about control. They're testing your boundaries again. The question is, are you going to let them?" No, I wasn't. I contacted my attorney the next morning. We met in her office, a sunlit space with hardwood floors and bookcases that smelled of old leather and fresh ambition. Her name was Janelle, and she had a reputation for being relentless. As I laid out the details, my grandfather's will, the sale of the house, Derek's threats, the photos, everything, I watched her eyes grow sharper by the minute. When I was finished, she leaned back, folded her hands, and said, "They're going to regret this." Over the next few weeks, the preparation began. Depositions, statements, digging through years of family history to expose every manipulation, every coercion, every lie they had told themselves and others to justify their actions. Janelle was methodical. She requested public records, financial statements, even social media screenshots. I gave her everything. I was done protecting them. Word spread quickly in Stamford. People who once admired my family began to distance themselves. My parents, once fixtures at charity luncheons and community boards, became suddenly absent. Yayla deleted her social media. Derek, who had built an entire personal brand around success, discipline, and integrity, went completely silent. And I kept going. I went to work. I showed up to pottery class. I hosted a dinner for friends and laughed louder than I had in months. I lived. And then, on a damp Thursday afternoon in May, I walked into the courtroom. It wasn't dramatic. No screaming, no outbursts. Just quiet tension, stiff postures, the heavy air of people who used to share holiday dinners now divided by rows of benches and cold legal procedure. I sat across from them, my mother in a beige blazer, my father looking smaller than I remembered, Yayla with her eyes fixed on the table. Derek was the only one who looked at me, his stare empty, unreadable. Janelle stood and began our defense. She was a force, calm, factual, slicing through their arguments with precision. She laid out the timeline, presented the notarized will, introduced the letter from my grandfather, even referenced the photographs Derek had sent me. The courtroom sat in silence as she read my grandfather's words aloud. "They don't deserve this house, Marley. You do." When it was their turn, their lawyer stuttered through a weak case. They had no evidence, no legal claim, just emotion and entitlement dressed up as injustice. At one point, the judge leaned forward and asked, "Is this really about distress? Or are you all just unhappy that she made a choice you didn't like?" The silence in the room said everything. The verdict came swiftly. The judge dismissed their case entirely, citing a lack of evidence and misuse of court resources. But it was what he said at the end that stayed with me. "This court recognizes your right to independence, Ms. Winslow. And no family, no matter how close or complicated, has the right to take that from you." I walked out of that courtroom taller, lighter, whole. But the real climax didn't happen in that legal battle. It came a week later, when my doorbell rang at sunset. I wasn't expecting anyone. The city outside was humming softly, the air warm and golden as it often was in late spring. I opened the door slowly, and there, standing in front of me, was Yayla. She looked tired, not physically, but emotionally, like someone who'd been carrying a burden too long and finally realized it wasn't hers to hold. She didn't ask to come in. She just stood there, silent for a moment, then said, "I'm sorry." I waited. "I should have done something that night," she continued. "When Derek grabbed you, when Mom and Dad turned it on you, I should have spoken up. I should have left with you." "Why didn't you?" I asked quietly. "Because I was afraid," she admitted. "Afraid of losing them, afraid of being next. But I lost you anyway. And now, I don't know how to fix it." I stepped onto the porch and looked her in the eyes. "You can't fix it, Yayla. Some things don't go back to the way they were." "I know," she whispered. "But maybe they can become something new." We stood in silence for a while, the sky turning orange and pink above us. I didn't forgive her. Not in that moment, but I let the door stay open. Not wide, just enough for a possibility. And maybe that was the real victory. Not the courtroom. Not the sale. Not even the silence from my parents and Derek. The real victory was that I had become the woman who could stand tall in the aftermath, who could defend herself without needing to destroy, who could choose peace even when vengeance was an option. I didn't need their punishment. I didn't need to make them beg. I had already won. I had survived the storm they tried to trap me in, and walked out carrying nothing but my name and my freedom. The version of me they once underestimated was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who had learned not just how to say no, but how to mean it. And I wasn't afraid of them anymore. It's been a little over a year since that final court hearing, and every now and then, I catch myself glancing back at the version of me that used to flinch at the sound of her phone buzzing, afraid it was another demand dressed as a family obligation. That version of me, the one who used to smile through clenched teeth at family dinners and excuse herself to cry in the bathroom, doesn't exist anymore. I buried her, not out of shame, but with honor, because she fought like hell to keep going. She held everything together until I had the strength to let it all fall apart, and then rebuild from the ashes. The condo that was once just a symbol of independence has become a sanctuary. I wake up now and make coffee without tension running through my spine. I no longer check the lock twice out of paranoia. I no longer hear my brother's voice in my head trying to twist my boundaries into selfishness. I have silence. Not the tense, suffocating kind I grew up with, but the peaceful kind. The kind that fills the room like sunlight and makes space for breathing. A few months ago, I took a trip. Alone. No itinerary. No one waiting for me at the other end. Just me and a rental car heading up the coast of Maine. I stopped when I felt like stopping, ate when I was hungry, and slept in places that smelled like ocean air and clean linen. I brought a notebook with me and wrote without pressure. Some mornings I wrote for hours. Some mornings I didn't write a single word. But through it all, I felt like I was finally meeting myself, not as someone else's daughter or sister, but as Marley Winslow, a woman who had walked through fire and didn't burn, who chose herself and survived the fallout. When I got back, there was a voicemail from Yayla. She said she was in therapy. She mentioned reading a book on family enmeshment and realizing just how much of her life had been shaped by trying to please people who never let her be more than a role they had assigned. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't push. She just said, "I want to be better. I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted you to know I'm trying." I haven't called her back yet. Not because I'm angry, but because I'm still deciding what my peace looks like and whether she fits into it. I've learned that healing doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it means loving someone from a safe distance. Sometimes it means letting them go without bitterness. Sometimes it means creating a life where your worth isn't tied to whether or not someone else understands it. As for my parents, I haven't heard a word. Not since the judge dismissed their case. Not since the community began to pull away from them quietly, the way polite people in small cities do when someone's dirty laundry becomes too public to ignore. I've heard rumors. My father resigned from the board of a local charity. My mother stepped down from her garden club presidency. No one says it's because of me, but I know better. And I don't feel guilty, because the truth always has a cost. And for once, they're the ones paying it. I've poured the money from the house sale into something new. I started a small business, a consultancy for young women navigating family estrangement and financial independence. I never expected it to take off the way it has. But apparently, there are more of us than people like to admit. Women who've been told they owe their families everything. Women who are shamed for setting boundaries. Women who've been gaslit into thinking that love should hurt, should silence, should come with strings. I've built workshops, created digital guides, and partnered with a therapist friend to host support groups. Every time I get a message from someone saying, "I finally feel seen," I feel like I've added one more brick to the foundation of something that will outlast the pain. I've also begun writing my story, not in bits and pieces this time, but as a full memoir. I don't know if I'll publish it. That's not really the point. The point is reclaiming the narrative, telling the truth, not as they told it, but as I lived it. Writing it all down has been both brutal and beautiful. There are days when I have to close the laptop and cry. Days when I laugh out loud remembering how naive I once was, how much I wanted to be accepted by people who never truly saw me. But mostly, there's relief, because for the first time the story belongs to me, fully. Sometimes people ask if I regret it all, if I wish I had just gone along with the plan, signed over the condo, kept the peace. And I think about it. I think about how easy it would have been to avoid the fight, to stay silent, to keep the illusion intact. But then I remember the way my body felt walking out of that restaurant after my brother put his hands on me. I remember the clarity, the sharp, breathless certainty that this moment, was the fork in the road. And I know, without a doubt, I made the right choice. Because the truth is, I didn't destroy my family. I survived them. There's a difference. Destruction implies that I took something whole and broke it. But what I did was remove myself from a structure that was already cracked at the foundation. I stopped holding up a house built on guilt and obligation. I stopped patching holes that weren't mine to fix. And when the walls finally caved in, I wasn't underneath them. I was already building something better. A few weeks ago, I hosted a dinner party. Just a handful of friends, good food, warm lighting, a playlist that made us dance barefoot in the living room. And as I looked around that night, at the laughter, the ease, the love without conditions, I felt something shift inside me. Not grief, not even pride, gratitude. Not for what happened, but for who I had become because of it. And maybe that's the real ending to this story. Not a dramatic final scene, not a confrontation or a breakdown, just a woman standing in her own home, surrounded by people who see her, love her, respect her. A woman who once felt like a guest in her own life, now fully inhabiting every corner of it. I don't know if my family will ever change. I don't know if one day Yayla and I will sit across from each other and laugh again. I don't know if my parents will ever understand the damage they caused. But I do know this. I will never again beg to be loved by people who only know how to love with conditions. And I will never, ever hand over what I've built, what I've earned, for the sake of keeping someone else comfortable. Not my home, not my truth, not my peace. I think sometimes people expect the end of a story like mine to look like a movie montage. Celebration, transformation, maybe a romantic subplot wrapped up with a neat bow. But real life doesn't move like that. Healing isn't cinematic. It's quieter, slower. It sneaks up on you in moments when you least expect it. Standing in line at a bakery, hearing your favorite song come on during a morning drive, waking up without the weight of dread sitting on your chest. It builds one day at a time, like bricks laid carefully by hands that finally know what kind of house they want to live in. A year and a half after I sold the house and took my family to court, I stood in front of a small group of women at a retreat I helped organize. The air was crisp with early fall, and the old wooden lodge in the Catskills where we were gathered smelled like pine and possibility. I was giving a talk on boundaries, not the kind you set once and forget, but the kind you reinforce every single day with small, steady choices. And as I spoke, I realized I wasn't sharing a theory anymore. I was sharing a life I had actually built. Some of the women cried, others took notes, and one came up to me afterward, holding my hand tightly as she said, "I didn't know it was okay to walk away from people who share your blood." I told her what I wished someone had told me years ago. Blood is biology. Family is earned. You owe nothing to those who hurt you simply because they share your last name. Love should never be payment for pain. I went home from that retreat with a strange sense of completeness. Not closure in the dramatic sense. There were still wounds that hadn't fully closed, still birthdays I didn't attend, still dreams that sometimes carried echoes of raised voices and slammed doors. But I wasn't haunted anymore. I was grounded, present, whole. Around that time, I finally called Yayla back. It wasn't an emotional reunion. We didn't cry or hug. We sat across from each other at a coffee shop, two women carrying the same past but walking different paths now. She looked different. Tired, maybe, but softer, like someone who had finally stopped pretending everything was okay. We talked about therapy, about growing up in a house that looked perfect on the outside but felt like walking on glass inside. She told me she had confronted Mom about everything, that it didn't go well, that she left in the middle of a dinner and hadn't gone back since. "I used to think we were close," she said, stirring her coffee. "But, really, we were just afraid of the same people." I didn't argue. It was true. Our closeness was survival, not connection. She asked if there was any way to rebuild what we had. I told her, honestly, I wasn't sure, that I was open to something new, but I wasn't going backward. If we were going to have a relationship, it would have to be on new terms. No guilt, no triangulating, no pretending. She nodded. "I think I'd like that." she said quietly. We started meeting once a month, slowly, carefully. Sometimes it was good, sometimes it was awkward, but it was honest. And that was more than I'd had before. I still kept boundaries. I still protected my peace like it was sacred, because it was. But I didn't hate her. And maybe that was enough. I never reconnected with my parents. There were attempts, of course. A birthday card, a vague email, an invitation to a distant cousin's wedding, but I didn't answer. Not out of spite, but out of preservation. My body still tensed at the sound of their names. That was enough of a signal. Some relationships aren't meant to be revived. Some chapters are meant to end. Not because you're bitter, but because you've outgrown the pages. My career flourished. The consultancy became a full-time business. I hired a small team, expanded into digital courses and speaking events. Women from across the country reached out, sharing their stories. Some had cut off contact with abusive parents. Others were learning how to say no for the first time in their lives. One woman wrote to me saying, "Your story gave me permission to walk away. For the first time in years, I feel free." I framed that letter. It hangs on the wall of my home office, just above my desk. Not to boost my ego, but to remind me that every time I chose myself, someone else watching found the courage to do the same. That my pain had become a blueprint for someone else's survival. And that's the thing about healing. When you do it loudly, without shame, you create space for others to do the same. The condo has changed too. What used to be a minimalist, carefully controlled space now bursts with color and texture. Plants hang from hooks in the ceiling. Books spill from shelves. There are photographs. Me with friends on the beach, laughing under twinkling lights at a rooftop dinner. Arms wrapped around women who have become like sisters. The kitchen smells like cinnamon and fresh coffee most mornings. Music plays often. Sometimes I dance, just because I can. And the woman in the mirror? She looks like someone I fought to become. Not perfect, not without scars, but radiant in her own quiet way. Unapologetic, unshaken, rooted in a life she chose, not one that was forced upon her. I still have moments of grief, triggers that surprise me, dreams that revisit rooms I've long since walked out of, but I've stopped trying to push them away. Now, I let them come. I hold them like old photographs, reminders of where I've been, not where I'm going, because where I'm going is mine. It no longer matters who doesn't clap when I succeed. It no longer matters who thinks I was wrong for choosing freedom. I live a life I love, surrounded by people who see me, who respect me, who understand that love is not a transaction. It's a choice I make every day, starting with myself. And maybe one day, someone will pick up the memoir I'm writing and see themselves in my words. Maybe they'll read the chapter about the party or the courtroom or the night I walked away and feel something shift. Maybe they'll whisper, "If she could do it, maybe I can too." If that happens, just once, it will have all been worth it. Because this wasn't just my story, it was my liberation, and I'll never let anyone write over it again. Have you ever had to walk away from the people who were supposed to love you the most, just to find peace within yourself? Share your story in the comments. If this journey resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more stories of strength, healing, and personal transformation. And if someone you know is struggling with family pressure or emotional manipulation, send this to them. They might need to hear it. Remember, choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's survival. Thank you for listening to my story, and never forget, you are allowed to protect your peace, even if it means closing the door on people who once lived in your heart.